You wanted to traumatize us and then to, on a dime, flip and look us in the face and go, how dare you ask questions? People are grieving. Yeah, we're grieving because you assassinated Charlie Kirk in front of the entire world.
Candace Owens just claimed that Charlie Kirk's murder was a military operation, and in this clip she explores her evidence for that and what leads her to that conclusion based on flight information, and also exposes the lies of Josh Hammer, who recently posted a long-winded explanation, which is ridiculous, about why Charlie Kirk said, verbatim, "I have no choice but to leave the pro-Israel cause."
One area of conversation that I haven't said much about, but I want you to know we are still working on it, are the two planes that day, right? One of them being the plane that people have recognized is military. That's tail number N1098L. So this plane left from Texas, went over to Utah right about the time that Charlie got assassinated. It dipped real low. It seemed like who knows what this plane was being sent there for, but the fact that this plane had been used in the military.
Questions about flights, deleted transponders, seized records, and simmering accusations have turned a single killing into a nationwide crisis of trust. If you want first-hand updates on this developing story and others, hit subscribe and turn on the bell now. A narrow set of aviation and communication anomalies has become the hinge on which public suspicion now swings. At the center are claims that a military-linked aircraft, known by its registration N1098L, flew in the area around the time Charlie Kirk was killed, that a Bombardier Challenger 300 departed shortly after the shooting, that transponders were allegedly turned off, and that fuel and movement logs at fixed-base operators and other flight records have been guarded by federal agents. Those claims, amplified by prominent commentators and amplified through social media, have fed a broader narrative that institutional actors, from investigators to media pundits and wealthy donors, have motives to shape the public story, and that until the aviation and evidentiary questions are answered, the official account cannot be trusted. What follows is a careful, plain language report that stitches together the claims, the known facts, the investigative steps that would prove or disprove the questions raised, and the larger political and cultural forces that have turned this into an explosive public controversy. I will present allegations as allegations, identify what would count as strong corroboration, and explain why transparency is the only realistic remedy for the swirl of distrust. The aviation puzzle, flights, timings, and why people are alarmed. Aviation details are technical but decisive. The specific claims at the center of the controversy are these. An aircraft registered as N1098L, described in some reports as military-linked, flew in proximity to the event site during the time frame of the shooting. A Bombardier Challenger 300 departed roughly 1 hour and 20 minutes after the shooting, and at least one aircraft's ADS-B transponder reportedly went offline for part of the interval. On their face, these facts are not crimes. Planes fly, transponders go offline for benign technical reasons, and private jets often move quickly after high-profile events for operational or safety reasons. The alarm arises when these flight facts intersect with other claims, that the removal of a rear-facing SD card was followed by federal custody, that certain records at FBOs, fixed-base operators, were guarded by agents, and that public statements by officials and some media figures about the timeline shifted in ways that appear inconsistent. If an aircraft tied to a military or intelligence program were operating in the area, that would raise legitimately different investigatory questions than if the aircraft were a private shuttle. Designations like military-linked cover a broad range, from Department of Defense flights to contractor-operated planes carrying government personnel on official duty. The operational reasons for such flights can be routine, classified, or entirely benign. As usual, context matters. Proximity alone is not evidence of wrongdoing. What would move the story from suspicious to probative is documentary or physical corroboration, flight plan filings, radar logs, ATC records, transponder metadata, maintenance or service records for the aircraft, and testimony from ground personnel about who boarded or disembarked. Without those, the presence of an aircraft near an event is an intriguing fact, but not a smoking gun. Transponder behavior and technical nuances. A transponder is the device aircraft use to broadcast position information. Turning a transponder off does not make an aircraft invisible. Radar and some air traffic systems still log primary returns, and other surveillance systems, multilateration or military-grade sensors, can still track an aircraft. Transponder shutdowns can be accidental, maintenance-related, or deliberate. Pilots sometimes switch modes during specific operations. They occasionally switch transponders to a different code under operational directions. However, in a densely tracked civil airspace and in an era of ubiquitous ADS-B monitoring, a transponder going silent invites questions that have standard technical answers. Investigators should seek the raw ADS-B feed, FAA radar logs, and any secondary surveillance records that capture the aircraft's path even if the transponder was off. Those records, when matched against witness timelines, would either confirm that the plane was where it was allegedly seen or show gaps that need accounting. Timing of flights relative to the shooting. The Bombardier Challenger 300 allegedly departing 1 hour and 20 minutes after the shooting is a specific data point that has been seized upon because of the proximity in time. Timing alone requires interpretation. A flight out an hour after a high-profile local incident can be coincidental. Many people leave public venues after chaotic events. Or it can be relevant if the manifest shows passengers of particular interest, if the aircraft path suggests rendezvous with other flights, or if the aircraft's communications show coordination with persons of interest. Solid investigation requires more than timing. It requires manifest data, passenger lists, boarding logs, fuel receipts, and, if lawful, interviews with crew. Unexplained absence of such documents, or evidence of tampering, would be meaningful. Allegations of guarded FBO logs and federal custody of records. Several reports claim that fixed-base operator records and logs have been guarded by federal agents. FBOs typically maintain fuel receipts, ground handling reports, crew and passenger sign-in sheets, and surveillance video of ramp operations. If federal agents are lawfully securing these records, there should be court filings or law enforcement papers documenting the preservation and chain of custody. That would be routine when a federal investigation is underway. Investigators secure potentially relevant documentary evidence to prevent destruction or loss. The public concern arises when the existence of sealed or guarded records coincides with opaque official statements and when media coverage is uneven. To remove doubt, agencies should document the legal basis for any seizure, provide a narrowly tailored summary of what was preserved, and, where lawful, allow defense or independent third-party review under protective orders. The role of commentators and influencers in shaping narrative and suspicion. Tweets, live streams, and cable segments have helped define the public frame for this story almost as much as investigators' statements. Candace Owens has been praised by some for probing flight records and raising the possibility of a military component. Others see such claims as speculative unless supported by primary source documentation. At the same time, pundits and authors like Josh Hammer have been criticized for using the controversy to promote books or to dispute incriminating screenshots, behavior that, for skeptics, looks opportunistic. Whether a commentator's intent is to uncover truth or to amplify division, the functional effect is the same. Narratives circulate rapidly, aspects of the story are repeated as if confirmed, and demand for official transparency multiplies. This dynamic matters because public belief shifts quickly in the presence of a coherent-sounding but incomplete narrative. That pressure can be healthy, prompting investigators to disclose more information, or it can be damaging if it leads to premature conclusions or misplaced accusations. The antidote is straightforward. Officials must publish verifiable facts where possible and explain the limits when they cannot. Similarly, commentators should be careful to label speculation as such and to avoid presenting unverified claims as confirmed fact. Kirk's politics, donor conflicts, and why that polarizes interpretation. Observers note that Charlie Kirk had recently publicly distanced himself from certain pro-Israel positions, and that he had frictions with major donors and media circles. Those political tensions give motive space to some theories. If a powerful constituency was upset, could pressure have escalated? Political motives are a plausible line of inquiry. They are also ubiquitous. High-profile, polarizing public figures often face threats, intense criticism, and political pressure. Investigators must parse between ordinary political friction and criminally relevant coordination. The presence of a disputed donor meeting, public texts showing strain, and the broad public argument over Israel policy are all contextual factors that make the investigation socially fraught. They do not, on their own, establish a particular criminal conspiracy. Broader themes: why people turn to internet sleuthing and alternative probes. Distrust of institutions, driven by perceived secrecy, prior scandals, and media failures, fuels grassroots sleuthing. In the absence of rapid, credible disclosures, people with time and technical skills begin to stitch together flight tracking logs, social posts, and third-party footage. Sometimes these grassroots efforts surface material that official channels missed. Independent journalists and open-source analysts have in recent years helped reveal wrongdoing in complex cases. But they can also amplify errors. Misidentified aircraft, misread timestamps, or misattributed social posts can propagate wrong conclusions widely. The balance is delicate. Citizen oversight is valuable, but it must be matched with professional verification and legal process. What would credible transparency look like, and why the public keeps asking for it? Restoring confidence requires specific, practical disclosures that do not compromise legitimate investigative methods. For the aviation questions, that means providing, under a court-supervised process if necessary, FAA radar logs, ADS-B records, transponder metadata, flight plan filings, FBO logs and manifests with appropriate redactions for privacy, and a certified inventory of what records were seized and why. For the broader evidentiary questions, it means publishing a chain of custody for critical items, offering a timeline of key investigative steps, and allowing independent forensic review where possible. Those steps reconcile investigative integrity with the public's need to understand. They are not a cure-all. Classified information and privacy concerns will always limit what can be publicly released, but they are the minimum needed to dampen conspiracy and rebuild trust. The danger of conflating issues without evidence. This story also illustrates a common hazard: stacking plausible yet unproven claims into an emergent conspiracy. Epstein-era cover-up narratives, debates over donor influence, and media failure claims are all real phenomena. Each can and should be investigated on its own merit. But stitching them together into a single causal chain without hard documentary support risks unfairly maligning people and institutions and distracting investigators from testable leads. Responsible investigators and commentators should prioritize corroboration, match flight logs to manifests, match timing claims to device metadata and surveillance footage, and use forensic methods rather than rhetorical leaps. What next? Practical investigative steps and what the public can demand. Investigative agencies should move quickly to do what facts require and to show they have done so. That means securing all aviation records, obtaining sworn statements from FBO staff and crews, imaging relevant flight data recorders or plane systems if lawful, and producing an auditable chain of custody for any seized evidence. Where national security concerns limit disclosure, courts can allow cleared, independent reviewers to examine materials and issue public summaries. Investigators should also publish a clear timeline that reconciles any apparent contradictions in earlier statements, and they should be explicit when they do not yet have answers. For the public and for journalists, the demand is simple and reasonable: push for verifiable records and resist the temptation to accept sensational narratives without documentary proof. Political actors who seek to use this moment for advantage, whether to promote books, drive ratings, or settle scores, should be held to the same standard of evidence as anyone else making serious allegations. Transparency is the only antidote to suspicion. The claims about N1098L, the Challenger 300, transponder behavior, guarded FBO logs, and the interplay between commentators and investigative statements are a complex knot. Each thread, aviation activity, donor politics, pundit behavior, and institutional secrecy, is testable. If investigators can show those tests were performed and can offer verifiable summaries of their findings, public trust can recover even if the answers are disappointing or complex. If not, suspicion will harden and the politics of the case will deepen. The public reaction is not merely curiosity, It is a demand for accountable institutions that can show their work. That demand is legitimate and democratic. The sensible path forward is procedural: preserve flight and ground records, produce auditable timelines, allow independent review, and encourage commentators to distinguish between verified facts and plausible theories. Do that, and the community can move from rumor toward documented truth. Fail to do it, and the story will remain a Rorschach test for partisan belief rather than a matter of established fact.